Uh, Good morning. A very warm welcome to you all today, and thank you for your attendance, especially in the midst of end-of-year examinations. I do understand it's a very trying time. However, with a lot of good fortune here, we have Peter from Saasyan, who'll be talking us through his experiences in student welfare and student welfare management through today's session, and also will be providing us with a short demonstration of their newest version of their Saasyan Assure Student Management and Welfare Platform version 5, due for release next month. So once again, thank you everybody for joining us. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping matters. There is a chat tab open on the right-hand side. If you have any technical issues, or alternatively you have questions to ask, please put them through on the chat tab, and we'll attend to them as we go through. We do have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation from Peter today. However, saying that, Peter has encouraged some questions throughout to keep it interactive. And without any further ado, Peter, a very warm welcome. Thank you. I'm going to take my video off and let you take control.
Okay. Hey. Well, thanks, Dean, and good morning, everyone. And I appreciate your time as well. As Dean said, we know it's one of those times of the year. We've got students in exam periods. You've got more than ever lots of challenges with COVID. So we appreciate your your time this morning and your goodwill. I'm going to very quickly talk about Saasyan for a few moments, then going to talk about some of the key challenges schools are facing, and then, as Dean said, jump into a demonstration of Assure. We're going to try to keep today pretty short and sweet so that we can, so you can get back to the things you need to be doing. Many of you may know Saasyan, but we're an Australian-owned and operated company. We're an EdTech software solution supplier, and so our focus is definitely on solutions for schools. And not only that, cloud-enabled solutions, so in particular software as a service solutions. We work with both public and private schools across Australia, and today we're pretty much the largest player in this space, and in fact recently have begun rolling out a more than 600 school network in South Australia for the South Australian Department for Education there. We have three things that we hang our hat on. We enable teachers, ICT managers, and pastoral care teams, as you can see there, to enhance student welfare, number one. Number two, improve learning outcomes. And number three, increase the school efficiency and effectiveness. And so I'm going to talk about how we do that over the next few moments. But we don't do it alone. We do it with partners like Aryon. And on top of that, we work very closely with leading manufacturers of enterprise-grade firewalls, namely Fortinet and Palo Alto networks. We also integrate quite tightly with learning management systems and school information systems, and also school productivity applications. And by that I mean, for instance, the likes of timetabling systems, which all become a very important part of the equation that we're talking about today. So what are some of the key challenges for school leaders? And look, realistically, I've just picked a couple here that I think are important and around this topic today. But clearly, cybersecurity is a top issue, and some really good reasons why. Even just in the last 6 months, the cyber attacks on schools are increasing. And in fact, I read a stat the other day. I'm just going to grab here. It was fascinating. It was 61% of all malware encounters globally. In this year up until to June, so it was July of last year through to June this year. So half of it was sort of COVID time. Were in schools. So 61% of all malware encounters were reported by schools. And it's not only hacking but also cracking. And we know that some young people, but others want to go in and just be mischievous in a network. And wreck things, so that's the cracking, but also hacking for lots of good reasons as well. They're, trying to, get access to data that clearly they shouldn't have. I mentioned both external and internal, and that's true. One one of the things that our young people have today is they have opportunity. They often have the skills to be doing attacking, but also they're on the inside of your network. And so being on the inside is a really important issue to deal with. And so, clearly there are a lot of things to consider when you're dealing with people on the inside of your network. Ransomware and phishing are also go hand in hand. In fact, I guess phishing often starts with people wanting to get information, login details, etc. Then they'll go in and run their ransomware lockups and try and hit you up to pay. In fact, a school just recently I was talking to here in Southeast Queensland, had 3 ransomware attacks in the last short period of time, and so they, unfortunately, every single one of them, their firewall was able to head that off at the pass, so there was no issue. But nonetheless, as a dedicated attack. I mentioned students, but one of the other things is that staff lose laptops, they're stolen, and sometimes don't have the appropriate passwords and security on them. So, they're all important things, but of course BYOD adds an important element to that. So why are you guys under attack at a school? And the answer is pretty simple. It's a target-rich environment. Excuse the pun from Top Gun there, where Goose says to Maverick, this is a target-rich environment. Well, I'm just waiting for the new Top Gun movie, clearly. But it's a target-rich environment. There's a lot of information, not only about the students who will grow up to be, good targets with money in the future. And some of these attack organizations have very long-term perspectives. But the other thing that is of course, there is a lot of parent data. And so there's a lot of parent information that gives us or gives certainly students the attackers, all the bits of the equation that they need to really make a dent. And last but not least, of course, is a lot of financial data and sometimes billing and account details. So really obvious things. So how are schools dealing with these things today? And so a lot of it lies around making sure that there's a good policy and a protocol in place in the first scenario, and dealing with the whole OSI model there, if you like, on the right-hand side, from literally physical right up to application layer, and each one needs to be thought about. But also physical security around devices, but also, logical security, digital encryption, for instance, is critical on devices. And I'll talk more about that in a few moments. Cybersecurity training is one of those things that is also really important. I know there's a lot of ICT people on this call today, but it's more than you. In fact, ICT, cybersecurity, is everybody's responsibility, from the principal through to a parent, including, for instance, parents not sharing their passwords with their students, for instance, and vice versa with their children, through to staff, making sure that, just because, QWERTY is easy to quickly type on a keyboard, or 112233, that's not a great reason to have that as your password. Kids can see it in 2 seconds flat as you're typing something in, and of course they're in. So cybersecurity is everybody's responsibility, and it needs to be trained, and it needs to be trained on an ongoing basis. And last but not least, but absolutely critical, is to implement a top grade, enterprise grade firewall. And, that means that you're really relying on those firewalls and all their web categorization, all the important things that go on with a firewall, including, for instance, the latest malware and threat attacks that they're across. And so really, really critical things. The other key challenge for school leaders is student welfare, and staff welfare. I'll add to that equation as well, but particularly students. And so we've seen, over the last 15 or 20 years, technology at school developed to be just absolutely par for course. It's every day, but it's both helping and hindering. And, we're now seeing digital natives. I was talking to a colleague at a university the other day who said to me they had someone applying for university next year who was born 2000 plus. So, clearly, these young people are digital natives, especially since, Google's been around for at least that long. But it's having an impact not only on students being that afraid with technology, but of course teachers, and teachers are at varying levels. And of course the whole pedagogy, the way they're actually teaching, has been changed as well. So well-being is really one of the most important aspects here. And so, and unfortunately we're seeing a rise in self-harm, in particular in this COVID time, and also cyberbullying. And it's a devastating impact on everybody involved, clearly on the family, on fellow students, on staff, and has such a big impact. And so, and whether that self-harm is minor, whether it's not even realised, or whether it's obviously at the extreme where it leads to significant self-harm, these issues are real. And last but not least, technology in this regard is also impacting the well-being and the learning outcomes of students because of really an obsession or a focus on social media and access, or maybe otherwise, to inappropriate websites. And all these things add up to disrupting classrooms. So how are some of these issues dealt with? And the most important thing is that guidance needs to be given to young people in particular. We need to put our arm around young people and guide them in the right direction, just as we do in helping them understand, times tables or grammar or ancient history, if that's what's being taught in the class. We guide them in that regard. We need to be guiding them in terms of best use of technology, and likewise teachers. And so part of that equation is about implementing cyber welfare software that's going to work in hand with the enterprise-grade firewalls, including unlocking what I've described there as that layer 8, that above the OSI stack, so where the humans are interacting with the technology. And so what's happening in a young person's social world, what's happening in their mind space, they're the types of things that are important. So promoting digital citizenship is a way to mitigate those issues. Enhancing well-being, enabling well-being staff to actually intervene early in conversation, and have that conversation before things get out of hand. And of course, reducing classroom disruptions. So I'm going to talk about how we address some of those things, particularly with Assure, in a few moments. But before I do, I also just wanted to say that there are two distinct approaches to dealing with cyber welfare software. And so here I've got a standalone device, sitting between the users on a network, most likely. That software could also be on device. There are some products that do that. But in these scenarios, you're basically seeing the firewall having something between the user and it. And so that often talks about, it brings up issues of performance bottlenecks. You may have a firewall that can handle 5 gigabits per second, but, a cyber welfare solution that, can only handle, 500 or 600 megabits per second. And these things change over time. And so when you have those points of performance bottleneck, the finger pointing happens, and you've got two sets of data. If you're wanting to get any decent data, you've got the data that's coming from the firewall, you've got what's coming from cyber welfare software, and it at the end of the day, it ends up costing more money in many regards. There is another approach, however, which is the way that we like to look at things, and that is that the way Assure works is that we sit to the side in the cloud, and we have no impact on the performance of traffic going through from users out to the internet. But what we're doing is we're taking logs from the firewall instantly, and as an API call, as a secure API, and putting it up to Assure in the cloud. The other scenario is that we do push back to the firewall a rule, and rules as an example, and I'll explain that in a moment of how that would happen. But that would, for instance, enable a classroom teacher to open up a particular firewall, a website, for instance, or an application that otherwise maybe a class couldn't get access to, without ICT teams needing to be necessarily involved. So Assure works in the cloud. It's fully scalable. It's fully flexible. You don't need to worry about sizing a box. If your network, for instance, you may start off by not having, I don't know, grade 1 through 5 involved, and then you increase to grade 1 through 5. You don't need to scale, have another box. We just simply turn it on for those extra few hundred, whatever it is, users, and it simply goes from there. The other thing is that we don't need to come on site to make it work. In fact, our installation with school is typically about 2 hours. We obviously have a lot of pre-work in getting your tenancy up and going, but it's really a very simple process from that point of view. So what Assure does is really, we like to think of us as unlocking all that important data that's going through a firewall and making it into some level of useful information. And so one of the concepts is democratization of data. And we actually are really firm believers in the importance of schools having the ability to, and everybody having access to data, because at the end of the day, it's the school's data. It's that student's data. And so they, to be able to provide information about that, so that, for instance, a teacher can look at a particular student's web habits, if that might be causing an issue, or it might be also an opportunity to really praise them and say, hey, well done, you're really using the technology well. But one of the biggest challenges with big data broadly is the aggregation of it. So there's many sources, and as there are, for instance, from a firewall. To give you an idea, we have about, typically see about 2 million records per student per year on a firewall, which is a massive amount of data. For instance, one Google search is about 15 or so records, in log files, log records inside a firewall. So we help turn that data into very pertinent data for a large group of people, from ICT through to teachers, through to parents and students, through to heads of curriculum, through to, importantly, wellbeing teams. And it's all about providing actionable insights, so that, it's not about, oh, here's a pretty graph, but it's like, what does that graph say? How can I use that to actually make a difference into what students are, how they're behaving? And it is broadly a behavioral issue. And so we can, and certainly schools see their responsibility to do that. So today I've made a quick mnemonic to try and remind you of, really 5 key things about. Sorry, Dean did it.
Peter, may I interrupt you?
Please, while I have another sip of my coffee, go for
it. You're a good man. On your previous slide, you used the word actionable insights.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, can you expand on that, please? What exactly do you mean by actionable insights?
Yeah, well, it's a good term because it does mean lots of things. So it's a good marketing term from my point of view. But that's actually part of the point, is that it is different things to different people. So, for instance, an ICT manager in a school would look at top applications and see, wow, maybe not surprisingly, video streaming, maybe it's YouTube or Vimeo or whatever, is a very high proportion of traffic. Or looking at, maybe grade 8's use of video versus grade 9, or, middle school versus high school, and that gives you an actionable insight. You go, okay, well, now that's interesting. We're seeing that level of traffic there. Why? And how can we use that? And so the ability to be able to drill down and look at that is important. Another example of an actionable insight in the most extreme scenario is, a young person who might be talking about self-harm on, they might be Googling, how much fentanyl do I need to take for an OD? And so, that's an actionable insight would be, and for instance, in that situation, an alert email going to, a wellbeing professional or whoever's appropriate in the school, so that they can actually do something with that information, including, obviously, getting in touch with that young person as they see appropriate. So it's for different things for different people, Dean. Yeah.
So on that, then, I understand Assure was originally developed as a welfare management solution. However, if I'm interpreting what you're suggesting correctly, I understand a lot of schools and colleges are very, very interested in learning analytics and how they can extract learning analytics. Is it possible to use the platform to enhance learning analytics? So, for example, behavioral deviations between different student profiles, or the changing behavior of a student, say from one term to the next, as that correlates to grade results, for example?
Yeah, it is, definitely. So the answer is yes. And in a few moments, I'll show you a screen that we call our rating screen. And so we've arbitrarily put some ratings on web categories, as you would know. Firewalls like the Palo Alto and Fortinet's, categorize websites. And so we've put, a rating from 10 very educational to 0 not educational at all, or 1 not educational. For instance, porn as an example was not educational, and or adult sites broadly, through to something like mathletics. Would be very educational sites. And so you can exactly see that rating over time change. But then you can drill down to it and say, okay, so what is it about that student? Why has their rating improved or not? And so it can give the a teacher or a counsellor the information to be able to have that conversation and say, okay, what's going on? And clearly, it's not just going to be about their online life. Students have a life that's not just online, although some of them will be sometimes hard pressed to see what that life is. But the reality is that this gives us an ability to have those meaningful conversations, about how they're spending their time online. We know one school, for instance, used it to help counsel their students where they were, committing to too many extracurricular activities. Maybe they were in hockey and swimming and blah and blah and blah and blah. And we're able to just look at that from a timetabling point of view and look at the data overall and go, okay, maybe it's time to be thinking about putting a couple of those things on hold until next term or next year. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, okay. Peter. I won't hold you up any longer.
Thanks, mate. No, ask away. And if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat window. So onto this safer mnemonic, Dean will make this available to you, but it's basically, it starts with S for security policies for students, staff, and the school. So it's really important to have those protocols and policies in place. And I know that makes sense, but you'd be surprised how many schools have a rubberiness about their policies and protocols. And so you want to have that in place because you have policies and protocols in place, you can then move to the next point, which is an action plan. So an action plan to reduce the attack surface. And Dean and I laughed earlier on, there's a typo on my slide there. They say you should never point out a typo on the slide. Well, I just did. It's the attack surface of your network of devices, of people, in fact. And what's interesting about the attack surface at the moment is that it's increased because of the more locations. There's, students being, certainly for a lot of earlier this year, more online than they were in classrooms. And then, of course, there's more online full stop. And so that has, really increased the attack surface. But it also goes to applications, how many applications it talks to. And there are some ways to reduce the attack surface, not the least of which is to, for instance, segment networks and make sure that segment the way, people use technology. It's not just networks. And of course, devices, making sure that, devices are well secured reduces that. F for flexible filtering from an enterprise grade firewall. So the ability to not only, look at malware attacks and, data loss prevention and, intrusion prevention and things like that great firewalls do really well, which is just, you need to just trust that is, in place. And so having an enterprise grade next-gen firewall is critical. And the reason I say enterprise grade, it's not a mistake there. Many of you ICT managers at schools are running networks that are in the direction of, 2,000 people on your networks. There isn't a 2,000 person organization, in corporate world that wouldn't have, a top two, top three firewall in their, protecting your organization. That's exactly what should be in place for a school too, for all the same reasons. And in fact, except that in this situation, often, intrusion prevention, for instance, is equally important as in a school environment. E stands for educate and evaluate on an ongoing basis. So this is not a one-off thing. You need to make sure that students are understanding their digital citizenship, and that changes over time. As an example, we heard of one school recently that splits their school up into 3 areas of skills. Entry level, intermediate, and advanced. And so, for instance, the idea is that a student going to grade 10 should be in an advanced level. They even get access to Facebook, as an example, at school, on school network devices. When they've done that, because they've gone through these stages of their digital citizenship. But also staff training is critical. And last but not, of course, you need to test. You need to make sure that you're educating and when you're evaluating, you're wanting to make sure that you're, making sure that things are exactly as you expect. And last but not least, reporting and alerting. So I like this term, I heard it years ago, but it's about you want to inspect to make sure you're seeing what you expect. Inspect to make sure you get what you're expecting. And so we'll talk about that in a few moments when I jump to Assure. So Assure's made up of...
That was interesting, Peter.
Mate,
I've always heard that what gets inspected gets respected.
That's a great line too. I'm going to use that one next time. Say it again. What gets inspected
gets respected.
I like that. That fits perfectly too. So yeah. So if you're, and that's an R. Come on, Dean. I should have shared my slide with you sooner, shouldn't I? Sorry. But yeah, respect. I love it. Reporting, respecting, and So I agree. If you inspect, then you'll know that it's important. That's like, it's the worst thing ever is when you do an assignment and the person's not looked at it because they didn't pick up half the things you got wrong, and you go, well, what's going on? Anyway, back to Assure. 4 key parts to Assure, 4 modules: reporting, alerting, classroom web access, and a management dashboard. And at this point, I'm going to quickly jump to just a very, very quick overview of Assure. I want to let you know that, of course, we'll be absolutely welcome to touch base with Dean's team and to coordinate a more in-depth demo at some stage. For those of you that might be Assure customers today, I'm going to be showing this new version 5. You will see that it looks a little bit different. Probably the most significant thing about version 5 is that there's a clean look and feel and a new change to the user interface, but there's also some new functionality as well. What's not changed is the widgets here on the front screen, which are all customizable. So for those of you who haven't seen it before, we have the ability to obviously add widgets. In this situation, I've got all widgets added. And so this is showing an ICT manager view, but this view can be customized for each type of role in the school. So it's really very much about role-based access. And so you're looking at an ICT manager's view at the moment. So looking at application bandwidth, what are the popular web categories? Again, these are coming straight from the firewall, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel there. This is exactly the same from there. What are the top websites that are being hit? Who are some of the heaviest web users? And all of the items on these screens, all of the components, if you like, are all hot linkable as well. So if I was to click through there, I'd go through to Marie Curie, but I'll just hold that for a minute and come back. We have this concept of an internet score, which is really, just hovering on the help text there. It shows you a combination of a couple of things there, both bandwidth and the website's accessed. And then bandwidth, literally over this period of time. And we're looking, for instance, here at the moment, 1 day. If I change that to, say, 90 days, you'll see, obviously, a much higher traffic. So we've got microfaraday at 700 meg in that scenario. And when it's screen sharing, it's taking a long time for it to refresh. That's a bit fun. So we'll come back to that in a sec. Social media usage is one that's common. So this is the number of hits. We're seeing Benjamin Franklin there at 46 hits. And top search phrases are here as well. And I'm just going to click on home again. That'll bring that back to me. Oh, that's because I left it too long to log in, didn't I? Stand by. I'll paste that wrong password there. There you go. The best things about demos, Dean, is that they need to be always checked. And so I'm just going to, this is
glad to see you've got your security in order there, Peter.
Well, that's exactly right. So in fact, I also don't, this is a serious password. So there we go. That's the reason. And I never click on that silly thing in Chrome, but yeah, all browsers do it. So let's go back and go from 1 day to 90 days again. That's much better. That's the reason that didn't refresh fast before. That was my silliness, not to recognize that I'd had this sitting in background, and it times out at the 10-minute mark. So yeah, so now we're seeing a lot more data for Ben Franklin. So for instance, 42 gig over this period of 90 days, as we're seeing here. And so one of the other really important things that, for instance, that would be good for a well-being person would be for them to see this most at-risk users, which has got a 2 scales, the cyberbullying on the X here and self-harm on the right, and showing that we don't have anyone at too significant risk right now. If you were seeing up the top right-hand side there, that would give us some risk, or at the extreme on either axis. But so this is showing us that we've got both Isaac Newton and S. Jobs here with their cyberbullying score of 1 only. But Nick Tesla has a self-harm score of 1. And so we could go in and drill down and have a look at that in some more detail if we wanted to. If we were a well-being person, that's what we would do. So I'm going to just quickly move on to a couple of key things about Assure. One of them is the ability to allow teachers to unblock websites themselves. And right on the top screen, this is a new feature to add a temporary rule capability here. And so, for instance, the teacher might be saying, well, look, Ben Franklin and Alexander Fleming are done well. They're already ahead of the game on what they've been working on. And so, for instance, I'm going to allow them to work on that assignment, for instance, on extremism. And but just for the next 45 minutes or so in this class, create a rule, and that's it. That rule is now in place within just a moment or two. Those 2 students would be able to go through and get access to those websites. So it's as simple as that. But rules has some more flexibility too. So for instance, if we were to add a more than just a quick temporary rule, again, we can do temporary again here. We can say that, for instance, it's going to expire, 2 months away from now. We can also enable the ability to not only allow sites, but also block sites. So it could be that, this class has been unruly for the last little while, and we just want to basically block everything for a short period, or maybe block access to YouTube because it's been, again, distracting. So we can select a whole group or multiple groups, for instance. Let's say it's just year 8, and we can just leave it as all in this situation. We have the ability as well to bring in timetabling. So, for instance, let's say it was, period 1 on Tuesday and also on Thursday, maybe period 2, that they're going to have access to maybe a specific URL or a web category. Again, let's pick a web category. It could be around copyright infringement as an example. And so, again, if we just save that, then that rule would be in place for those students in that we selected, and off we go. The other key thing about Assure is just jumping back up to reports, is that you can do reports per user, also reports on a whole group. So let's have a look at a report. We look at maybe Alexander Fleming over the last, let's say 30 days, and we click Generate Report. What's coming up on screen now is a quick visualization of the last few days for Fleming, but also then data that's going to be across the whole 30 days. So in the last few days, we actually see pretty much that, in a particular class. So we're looking here on the 27th of October during period 3. There's a bunch of SSL. Now, on this particular demo site, we're not decrypting SSL, but that's an important thing to do in a network. And the reason in this demo site we let it show is because it shows you how much is really missing if you don't decrypt SSL on the firewall, and the firewalls are very capable of doing it. Appreciate there are some good housekeeping issues to deal with that, but nonetheless it's important. And so the other thing is that this is a double Y-scale graph, so it shows the number of web hits here, which is what we're seeing in the bar charts, but also the number of category alerts. So this is the number of times, for instance, Fleming has tried to go to an inappropriate website, as an example, and there's been none, which is great. If we look down here, we're now looking at not only where they've been, which is up here, but now we're looking about what they're saying when they get there. And so in the case of Fleming, again, we're not too concerned, but now we're also looking at the type of application. So we're seeing, a lot of Microsoft updates that went through for him during period 3 as well. So that gives you an understanding of what's going on. But across every user, we have some really powerful information. So for instance, the ability to look at the top web categories. And this is one of those actionable insights, Dean, that we talked about. So the ability to compare, in this situation, Fleming versus the whole cohort is really powerful. We can do a similar scenario with respect to applications. So what applications is Fleming using relative to the cohort? So they're doing a lot more SharePoint than Fleming is on, obviously, Adobe Creative Cloud. And that could be because he did some updates. I'll come back to rating in a moment. Let me just jump to video. And so this is the types of videos that Fleming has been looking at, exactly when he looked at them. We can actually then say, well, look, this looks like a similar one. Let's just filter to look at all those. This is one of the new user interface capabilities in version 5, the ability to quickly filter a table. And also, of course, we can see exactly what that video was. If we click on this, that'll pop a new screen and take us straight to that YouTube video that he was getting to. Likewise in search, so this shows us literally the search phrases that Fleming's been going to. So for instance, let's say we see he's been going to the Red Hot Chili Peppers. We can type chill, and it's going to search for anything where he's got Red Hot Chili Peppers. Yeah, it's not a big deal. He's done it a few times, and it was obviously on his mind there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that day, as he was trying to wait for that last bell before he left. So, no significant issues that we can see there in search. But again, one of the things about Assure is we're not only keeping the things that are negative, but also the positive too. Speaking of positive, let's have a look at the rating for Fleming. And so, Dean, again, this is one of the actionable insights, and I've said I'd talk about the rating. So in this situation, we've seen, Fleming over a period of the last year, that his ratings actually improved. So it started off at 3, went down a little bit, maybe some counselling or a few conversations, or maybe that digital citizenship class, helped him, think about the way he was using technology. But it's been a really significant increase in the last 30 days of using technology that's appropriate. And again, as I would just remind you that this comes out of thinking about all the web sites. They all get categorised by the firewall, and then we allocate a rating, which the schools can modify. And so we can actually see, Fleming's rating, how it changed. So 6 is a great increase to where it was. Last but not least, I'll have a look at alerts. And so in the case of Fleming, there are no alerts in the last 30 days. If we just have a quick look at 90 days, and we'll just see if there's anything specific there in terms of alerts for Fleming, and there was. And so, for instance, you'll see some searching that he was doing back in September, and some words that in this situation effectively are a false positive, but this one isn't, and neither are these. And these are not significant big deals in this situation, but again might just help provide that little bit of information that gives the teacher or wellbeing person some more information. I'm not going to go through traffic reports in detail or in web reports, but instead I'm going to jump straight to alerts. So if reports are about where a student has been, alerts are about what they do when they get there. And so in this situation, we have the ability to have an alert sent to us if a particular activity triggers a scenario. And so an example of this is the history of all triggers that are being triggered. They can either be by dictionary alert, or they can also be by a category. So a category is like when they've gone to a website, as I said, or the dictionary is when they've actually said something specifically that's caused a dictionary match there for them. And so, again, this is across all students. We could very quickly filter if we wanted to on Ben Franklin if we wanted to at that point. But let me show you instead how we actually create an alert and what the capabilities are for alerts, just ever so quickly. We say year 8 and we wanted to look at them all. And let's say we want to look at, year 8, year 9 boys. Any teachers that have ever been a teacher know that year 8, 9 boys are a good challenge, mainly because their hormones are aging. Categories like adult are important. But, they also might be using, inappropriate language and terms that are not appropriate. And so this will send an alert to an appropriate person. So you put in an email address, you put it, year 8, 9, adult, whatever the words you wanted to use in the email subject, and that would turn up as an email. But we can have that email sent either immediately, or we can actually send it when, for instance, this group is accessing websites or meeting the trigger more regularly than others. So that's where it's cohort relative. So if they're doing more than the rest of the cohort, then it shows up. Or recurring if it's happened more than once in the last few weeks. And last but not least, it could just be a digest, so it doesn't send it automatically. It just goes every day at X time, 2 p.m. or whatever you want it to be. Also, on any alert, there's a time when schools get to rest. And so, for instance, this alert is going to be in action 24/7. But in concept, if you wanted to only look at alerts that, for instance, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., that would be, or 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., that would be okay. And so outside that period, it wouldn't be an alert. So that's the alert functionality. Last but not least, I'll just show one last thing in Assure is that we take security really seriously. And so one of the new features in Assure version 5 is the ability to, not a choice I might add, the ability to actually see every report that's run. So you can see these reports that I've run just a few moments ago are all fully logged. You can see I did a report on Fleming it'll be, what period I ran it for those 30 days or 90 days. That was the last one we ran for 90 days. And so you can actually see that I did that at that time, that rules were created, that an advanced report run, that someone modified the whitelist phrase, etc. a couple of days ago. And so they're the types of things that are now logged. This is unable to be edited by anyone, including ICT, as a ongoing history of what's been happening on the Assure system. And again, that's all stored in the cloud, so it's also quite secure from that point of view away. So Dean, at that point, I'm going to hand back to you. Yeah, go for it, mate.
Great. Well, I've been holding off on a few questions that have come through as you ran through the new platform. So some of the questions related to what was a little bit earlier on, and otherwise. So I hope you don't mind just handling them as they come through. So when you were creating those temporary allow and block style rules, I think what happens when that time limit exceeds? So, for example, when you're allowing or blocking a site, I presume you're creating a rule on the firewall. Does that then get removed when the time limit is exceeded?
From the firewall, although the record of that is, of course, kept in Assure, and the log file of the log in the firewall would, of course, have it as well. But yes, it gets removed. So if you have a time frame for it to finish, then it would go away. So, for instance, 30 minutes is allowed for a particular URL or a particular category, then it goes away. So, yeah, great question. And definitely it basically turns itself off. And that could be 60 days later or it could be 60 minutes later. It doesn't really matter.
Okay.
Yep. You can also set up rules that are not able to be, for instance, that an ICT manager would set up that cannot be overridden. For instance, there's probably never any good reason at all anyone in a school would be able to access, for instance, adult websites. It would be a very rare scenario. And there are other ways to do it if you really needed to do it in that scenario to check, for instance, a website. And so in that scenario, you basically set a rule that, can't be overridden in that situation. So there's also control around it based on the role of the person making the change And it even limits. So, for instance, in my scenario here, I was only seeing year 8 and 9 students as an example. Year 10, 11, 12, I didn't have access to.
I'm reading another question here, and it's actually I'm not sure if it's even possible, but it just goes to show how creative some students can get when they need to be. So we've got a scenario where we've got some kids using Word Online as a chat tool. And is there any way that Assure can help with inspecting keywords passing through, for example, where kids are using the Office Online product, so Word Online as a chat tool?
Sure. In concept, the answer is yes, and I'll explain my word in concept there. So we do have the ability to look at all traffic, not only coming through the firewall, but in the case of, say, Google Workspace or G Suite or O365, now M365 from Microsoft. We have the ability to actually go into those environments directly from Assure in the cloud, going to Microsoft 365 as an example in the cloud, and interrogate that data. And we do that. A good example would be someone chatting in Microsoft Teams, and that environment is, but they're at home. They're not going through the firewall at all. So but we can still get access to that data. And the unusual one of looking at using Word as a chat tool, I'm assuming it's literally in the text of the Word document. That would require a bit more investigation. However, the chat function inside that, we know that the chat function, for instance, in G Suite uses a Google Chat or Google Hangouts as its chat mechanism there. I think that Microsoft 365 probably has a similar function. Well, I know it has a similar function, but it probably functions in a similar way. But if it's in the document itself, currently we don't inspect documents in that regard as they're going through. But that's why I said in concept, we do have access to that data, or we can be given access to that data, and it would be possible. But at the moment, it's not a function within Assure.
Right.
But
So regardless
it's a great idea.
So regardless of whether this is G Suite or M365, presumably with the API access, you're doing keyword or data searches within that tenancy.
Yep.
So is it fair to assume then that it doesn't matter whether the student is on the school site or off site, because it really is irrelevant? Is that fair?
That is fair. That does require some additional functionality to do that. And I'll be quite specific there, we have a product called Reciprocity that goes in, replicates data from other locations in the case of M365, and brings it into Assure as if it's actually come through the firewall, but obviously it hasn't. And we bring it into Assure and then can look at it that way. So so that aspect is doable. The specific aspect of looking at, for instance, Word Online inside Word Online as a chat is something that we don't currently do, but in concept could do. And there are lots of things that that we can and can't do as to how commonly they're done. And but the product is enhancing all the time. It's a great idea. We have heard it before. It happens every once in a while. We deal with the Google Chat one by, the Google Doc one by them using Google Chat. But if they're typing inside the document, no, we don't. But again, those documents are available for the school, but whether it's not going to do an alert like you would expect.
Okay, great, thank you, mate. We've got some really, I was going to say great questions, tough questions coming through.
Yep.
So if we've got students using virtual machines to attempt to hide their activity, is there any way that Assure can see that?
Yeah, well, so the VMs are just yet another machine. So if that virtual machine, maybe the browser inside that Ubuntu client, for instance, that the students spun up, it's still getting out through the internet, so it's still going forward. But obviously there are ways to to limit that. Similar way that, for instance, we don't we look inside Facebook, messenger chats as an example. But if a student is using that on their phone, and that phone's not connected to the network, then clearly we can't see it. And I think probably the important story here is that part of what Assure is doing is not seeing, we're not trying to be, in IT, we all look to do everything at 100%. And I'm not suggesting that we're 50% a company, but things don't, with respect to behavior, it's not always about 100%. It's about getting the indicator to then have the right conversation. And I think that's the way to look at it. So for instance, teachers only see students for, maybe, a couple of hours a day. If, a particular student, maybe if they have them for, 2 lessons. And they get a feel for that, but they're only seeing them for 2 out of 24 hours in the day. Let's say they're asleep for 8, but there's still lots going on that they can't see. And so, but what they see in those 2 hours is important. And that's likewise. So what we see in a student with their browsing history and their video history is pretty similar to what they might be doing in other places as well. And so it gives an indication. Truth is, if a student wants to hide what they're saying or doing, they're clever about it and they're going to hide. And not only online, but also face-to-face. They're not going to give the teacher the F-bomb saying you're an effing idiot, to their face. They're going to say that when they're out of the class so that they don't get caught. That's the reality of behaviour. But that ends up showing itself in other ways. So we can indicate things.
I think that's a very good point there, Peter, because one of the other questions I think you've very much answered as a byproduct, which is around how teachers could use the tool to offer comparatives against the cohort, use that during P&T or parent-teacher interview evenings, and I think that's the key message there. If I'm hearing you correctly, which is those behavioural indicators will tell the story for itself, as opposed to the minor nuances or the technicalities of what they're attempting to do.
You bet. Yeah. That's also one of the reasons why we don't try and we keep good data and bad data. So that, for instance, a parent-teacher interview might happen. Say, look, we're really concerned about Freddie's internet access, and say, well, okay, well, I haven't seen that in class, but let me do some investigation. And so they can then go and look at it, and they say, well, actually, relative to the rest of the cohort, that's not so bad, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And go that. Or they may say, hey, look, actually, what we have found is this. And so we can go through. And it may not have necessarily been alert-worthy behaviour. So it's not necessarily that something that's created an alert, but it might be something that gives an indication. And so, likewise, I just want to remind once more that one of the key capabilities of Assure is the ability to reinforce good behaviour as well as look for behaviour that's inappropriate as well. And so the ability for a teacher then to be able to reinforce and say, fantastic, I know a whole bunch of you have watched that, flipped classroom video that I put up yesterday. Thank you for that. Hey, for those of you who haven't had a chance yet, look, make sure you do it before the weekend, because next week's assignment is, covering that. And so that ability to have those meaningful conversations is exactly the type of thing that, just lets the class know that the teacher's on top of it, number one. Number two, it really does, for those that have done the right thing, that they feel good about themselves. And that's an important part of the development of young people's use of technology.
Couldn't agree more. Peter, I've just noticed we're right out of time.
We are.
What, with your permission, I'll take back over the slide deck there. Get ourselves back. So, look, I was intently listening and have completely lost track of our timer there, and we are out of time. But please, anyone who's on the call or the session today, look, Peter's only been able to just briefly touch on some of the elements within the platform. If you would like a more detailed demonstration or explanation of Assure or any of the other platforms that Saasyan have developed, I think Peter mentioned reciprocity to support, I suppose, the school systems and student welfare management systems. Please reach out to Peter or to myself directly. Aryon's main contact details are there. And again, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day. I understand, particularly as I mentioned in the opening, we are in the midst of Year 12 end of year examination. So I do greatly appreciate that you have taken the time out of your day to I guess, listen to some of Peter's experiences and have a little bit of a snapshot with the platform. And with that, Peter, please, I think we'll close out today's session. Thank you.
It's great. Thanks, guys.